Oh, I am live. All right. It yells at me with a alert dealy bobber. Welcome to Full Circle. I'm Chad. I'm back. Took last week off. I've got some stuff going on. I was busy. Unfortunately, not a ton of news going on really either. So I don't feel too bad. Like, there's nothing monumental that we missed. So the one big thing going on is the battle engine. The Fulcrum is still in the CID. This is the last week for it. So I missed. So this is week 4. Just to sort of go over what we've talked about and what I've missed. In week 1 and 2, there were no changes in week 2. The Fulcrum was changed to have a rule called Quiet the Stones, which within 5 inches of it, it could leech Fury from friendly wolves. It had a rule called Fury Bank that allowed a Warlock during the control phase to allocate Fury to it. And it has added Veteran Leader Blackclad, and it went to 30 boxes. So that's where we started the adventure. Stayed the same for week 2. Week 3, the week I missed last week, it dropped down to 28 boxes to 18 points, and Fury Bank was removed. Some of that was that for a largely ranged / support piece, they felt like it was just a little too tanky, so that's why the hit points went down. And they also were looking to really solidify it in its role with bringing wolves. And so they tried it out without the Fury Bank rule. I thought that version probably would still be fine, especially with the point decrease. But there was many of the Circle community who disagreed. I did not get a chance to playtest that version. I've only really gotten a chance to do one game with it, or maybe two, with CID rules. So I've just been a priority on playing some other stuff that I have Muson Con coming up. I kind of want to have at least one list I feel pretty good about, maybe 2. I certainly need 2 lists, but I don't know that I'll have time to. I'll probably be falling back. Anyways, we'll get to that later. So this past week, the week I missed, I also didn't get to play. Like I said, I think those rules would have been okay. A lot of people were pretty down on them. Felt like it locked them into too much of a wold composition, and range wold specifically because of that 5-inch range on the leech, as well as the fact that you really want to keep one of them alive, because otherwise your Fulcrum late game is going to be pretty mopey without being able to boost. So especially since it doesn't just randomly generate the Fury like it did before. This week, today, we got the third update, the week 4's update. They returned Fury Bank. They returned it to 19 points, and they changed Quiet the Stones to go out to command of 10. So it stayed at 28 hit points, but it got those changes. So I feel like that's really the best of all the worlds. I think 28 is fine. 28 versus 30 is not a huge deal. 28 points is in the range of most of our heavies that are not wolves, so I think you're in that ballpark. So I think that's good. The reason to change to command was you weren't so locked into feeling like your only option was to play ranged wolves. So that is also good. And yeah, so those are the changes. I really like it. I also like the command. I like one thing I like that they sometimes do, but occasionally don't do, is keeping the number on the Warlocks and Warcasters notwithstanding on the number the same, right? So the Wraith Engine at one point had its rule was 8 inches while its command was 10, and the Fulcrum sort of had a similar thing. There's a couple others that have had that. Just, if I don't know that anybody from Privateer actually listens to this, but if it's much simpler if you keep the rules to what their command is, or at least consistent, right? So like it had Veteran Leader and this Quiet the Stones rule. One goes to 10 inches, one goes to 5 inches, and it's just one of those things that ends up being a thing that somebody will forget in the middle of a game, especially in a very heated game that's going back and forth, and they're like, yeah, I can totally leech out to 10 inches, but it's really 5, and then you've got a problem. Or vice versa, they didn't get their veteran leader bonus because somebody's like, isn't that only 5 inches? They're really, yeah, just it's little stuff. So I like that change a lot. And it is obviously a buff. I mean, it's a bigger range of influence. So I'm pretty excited there. Like I said, don't know what I'll get a chance to play test with that. We'll see. I'm not going to hold my breath on that. I think if it stays like this or very close to like this, I think it'll be a very good piece that will see play. So that is spectacular. Aside from that, I don't believe there's any news. It's been kind of pretty quiet on the privateers front, if you will, and I suspect they're probably kind of getting into. I mean, Grimkin is the big thing coming out, and Lock and Load is kind of right around the corner probably for them. I mean, it's about 6 weeks out, but they have a lot of stuff they have to do for it. So I think for this week we'll go to our tried and true. Let's talk about some circle models. Next week I may talk about what I'm taking to MuseonCon, or I may do that the week following as a wrap up. So we'll see on that. Looking at the whole list of what's left to talk about on here, and we don't have a whole lot. We'll have to revisit some pieces down the road, or hope that they release some stuff for me to talk about. Although my painter would probably be okay with a bit more of a reprieve before there's more models for her to paint. But let's talk about Baldur. We're gonna talk Baldurs. We'll make this the Baldur episode. So we'll start with Baldur 1, Baldur the Stonecleaver. He is a circle black clad warlock. He is speed 5, strength 7, mat 7, defense 14, armor 16, command 8. He has Pathfinder. He's Fury 6 with 31 Warbeast points. He has 17 damage boxes, and his melee weapon is Tritus, a 2-inch range, plow plus strength, damage type magical, plow plus strength 14, damage type magical melee weapon, which has the rule Weight of Stone, which states when a model is damaged by this weapon, it suffers -3 speed and defense for 1 round. Additional rules for Baldur: he has a rule called Elemental Mastery, which states that construct warbeasts in his battle group beginning their activation in his control range can charge and make power attacks without being forced, and he Baldur can heal friendly construct warbeasts, which is normally something you cannot do without a special rule such as that one. And then his second ability on the back is called Forest Walk, which states while completely within a forest, this model can forfeit its normal movement to use Forest Walk. If it does, choose a location completely within this model's control range that is completely within a forest. Remove this model from the forest and place it in the chosen location. This model cannot use Forest Walk while knocked down. Okay, and then let's go ahead and go to the back. He has 4 spells, first of which is Earth Spikes, which is a 3-cost, range 10, AoE 3, power 13, offensive spell. When making this attack, ignore cover, concealment, and elevation. On a critical hit, models become knocked down. He has Rapid Growth, which we talked about on Wormwood. It actually originated on Baldur. It's a 2-cost, range within his control area, AoE 4, upkeep, non-offensive spell. It states place an AoE completely within Baldur's control range. The AoE is a forest that remains in play as long as its upkeep is paid. He has Solid Ground, a 2-cost range self control area AoE upkeep that is not offensive. While in Baldur's control range, friendly faction models cannot become knocked down and do not suffer blast damage. And finally, he has Stone Skin, which is a 2-cost range 6 upkeep. Target friendly faction model / unit gains +2 strength and armor, but suffers -1 speed and defense. And then finally his feat, which is Broken Earth. I'm just going to read the rules. While in Baldur's control range, friendly faction models gain cover, while in his control range. Enemy models never have Pathfinder and treat open terrain as rough terrain. Broken Earth lasts for 1 round. So, Baldur 1. I would say the thing about Baldur 1 is he's kind of like a good warlock. He's always kind of been a good warlock. He wasn't really played a ton in Mark II towards the end. And in Mark III, I would say he's just become our, like, you can kind of put anything, you can kind of play a lot of things with Baldur, not necessarily anything, but he has a wide variety of approaches you can take. He has a lot of tools. They're not the best, like, nothing he has is necessarily exactly the best tool, right? So let's take his feat, for example. Cover is a really good ability. It's probably still not as good as Gale Winds from Kruger 1, or situationally Stonewall from Kruger 2, or line of sight blocking from the Forest from Wormwood, which again, the line of sight blocking also being superior. That's also superior. That's also rough terrain, so it's very similar feat in that regard. But it's still a good feat, right? Turning Pathfinder off entirely, and that means, just for the record, that includes Colossals and Battle Engines. There's no exemption for them. They don't have Pathfinder. That makes something like a Conquest incredibly mopey. Good job. You can move 2 inches. Or you can charge 3.5. Woo! So it's a good feat. It's always been a good feat. It's not a great feat. And although I would suggest in Circle, we only have so many feats that I would start talking about in the great category, but we have a lot of good ones. This one is no exception. It's a good feat. His spell list is a good spell list. He has Rapid Growth, which is a line of sight denier. It's a Forest, which we have other synergies with. Things with Prowl are triggered, for example. Things with Tree Walker like it. He has so one of the biggest buff to Baldur from Mark II to Mark III, and he changed. There is literally no text. Sorry, that's not true. There's almost no text on his card that has changed. I believe the only change is that Solid Ground now says Friendly Faction, and his feat now says Friendly Faction, where both said friendly before. I believe that is the only words added to his card. However, the game changed around his spell list a little bit, and Stone Skin used to be an incredibly awkward spell. You really wanted to, like, only put it on a wold after it had gotten to where it needed to go, or if you could use stones to port it, or something that was dug in, like maybe Skinwalkers that are already dug in, because you couldn't charge if you had a speed penalty in Mark 1. And it always was good on Blood Trackers. Sorry. Always good on Blood Trackers because of how it interacts with thrown weapons, and the speed wasn't a big deal. You weren't usually charging. Or you didn't usually want to charge. So it's now on now -1 speed is just -1 speed. There's no stopping you from charging. There's no additional provision that stops you from charging. So obviously -1 speed and -1 defense is not things you want, but +2 strength and +2 armor absolutely are things you want. It makes the spell still useful in the situation that I described before, right? Where you want to put it on something that you're going to teleport in, or otherwise increase in speed, or etc. etc. It's always been good on things like Blood Trackers. The reason Blood Trackers are a phenomenal unit with Baldur altogether. First, Stone Skin changes them from 1411 stealth to 1313 stealth. The armor here, negligible. The defense here, the -1, is important, but I think in this, yeah, you really have to weigh that against, like, what you think your opponent's going to be doing. But if you have prey on the correct model, it's now going to you've effectively got power 13 thrown weapons from your Blood Trackers, and that's going to kill a lot of stuff. Or even just power 11 if it's not the prey is you know, that's good, because then you're not as reliant on prey. But it's also going to be good on anything. We don't have another spell in the faction that buffs damage output of a unit. We have the things that we have that buff output. We have Curse of Shadows on 2 casters, and that's going to buff our output against a model, but not for an entire unit. And there's some subtle differences in how that'll play. Sometimes not subtle. Kaya has Force Evolution. Kai 2, Kai 3 has Synergy. Bradigus has Synergy. And Tanith has Scything Touch, which again is going to work very similar to how Curse of Shadows works. You're not where you're going to use a model to apply it, but it's still only going to be against it might be against a few things, but it's going to be within a short range. And Hand of Fate from Una. So Hand of Fate is a very different spell than this. The math should work out similarly, but it's also it's really still the same curve. The +2 is going to move you up the curve, where once you're getting to the part where you're going to be dealing less, it's probably about the same if your expected damage is in the middle, or the armor values in the middle of what you want to hit. As it goes higher, the +2 will actually be better, and it's technically a little better. I think Hand of Fate is like plus 1.8 on average, which is not how it works, obviously. Yeah, so that's the that's one of the strengths of Stonesoul. So it's really good on blood trackers. I think, frankly, it's really good on just about any unit. We don't have that many that are that slow. You can pick and choose when it needs to be there. I think it's probably good on anything short of, like Reeves and Boldsark and stuff. It's good on beasts as well. Something like Getorix, where he can Spiny Growth himself, he's going to go to a 1321. That's POW 21. Seems decent. Feral, again, likes, it could be a 1320 potentially. Our Wolves love it. They don't care if their defense goes down when your defense 9 and 10. Who cares if you're one less? And they do love the armor. They obviously don't like the speed decrease because of the fact they're already slower, but situationally that's going to be a big deal. One change that does apply here that I think is very relevant, though, is you cannot use your Wolves to Geomancy that spell around like we used to be able to. So that's a bit of a downer. You used to be able to charge with Megalith or Wold, then cast it after you charge, so you didn't lose the distance on yourself, but that doesn't work anymore. So Stoneskin's a very good spell. I think when you're playing Baldur, you're gonna have you're gonna want to keep your eye on being able to cast that spell. You're gonna have to be a little bit aggressive with him sometimes to get if you need the Pathfinder, the rough terrain part of the feat, you'll have to get him pretty aggressive. He's only speed 5. He can't run and do it. He could fail a charge. Sometimes you can get a force in the right place, things like that. But if it's not up far enough, you'll have a hard time getting benefit from it. And he does have a smaller controller than like a Kruger, or most of not most of circle, but a solid amount of circle with our Fury 7. Something to keep in mind. And even a little smaller than like Bradigus, who's a big base. He's going to gain an inch-ish on his controller. Other things to keep in mind, like I said, feet good. Stone Skin's very good. Solid Ground is obviously fantastic. No Knockdown synergizes with a lot of things in our faction. We don't have the Gatorman Witch Doctor does not make things tough anymore, but all of the medium-based Tharn models have tough, so no Knockdown tough Ravagers, pretty cool. No blast damage on the spell is very good for things like Blood Trackers and Blood Weavers. So that's something to keep in mind. Both of those units I think are fantastic with him. Any of our lower armor infantry models that just don't want blasts drifted on them, I think that's a very great spell. The one place to not count on it being effective is into Krios 1, where I feel like he absolutely should be, but Krios has Purification, so it sort of undermines what Baldur's able to do, because he can just purify it off and then feed. It's always been kind of a frustration of mine. But Krios 1, not terribly popular right now, and we do have some other ways to play into him. So trying to think of any other obvious things. I think as far as themes go, you could play any of our themes, and you could probably play him out of theme, and all of those would be viable. I don't see a big reason to bring a lot of out of faction models with him, minion models. Just nothing's really popping out to me there. But like I said, all around, Baldur's just like a good warlock. He's not flashy. He's not doing anything. What he doesn't have is any like movement increasers or whatever you want. You know, he doesn't have anything that's going to help you get to the enemy aside from using his feet to hopefully help you get the alpha a little bit. He does have protections in the form of solid ground and his feet, the cover from his feet. So he can play into ranged a lot of the time, and he can play into melee a lot of the time with that. The line of sight denial from his one spell is going to be pretty good. But I think you can play him, like I said, I think you can play him pretty much in any theme. His synergies with Wolds, I think, make the Bones of Orboros theme appealing. I think Stone Skin is a really good spell on, like I said, pretty much anything. Wolves of Orboros, Skinwalkers, if you're going the route of the Wild Hunt, and that lets him take Wolds, so he can kind of tailor his battle group however he would please. I think with the Tharn theme, Devourer's Host, there's a lot of potential for synergy there too. Again, I think Ravager's going to 12-17 is still a pretty good stat line, especially when you add in that they can get that no knockdown tough without the Shaman, and they really like cover to get across the table. So all good stuff. Don't feel trapped into feeling like you have to play Baldur 1 with Wolds. That'll be true here in a minute when we get to Baldur 2 as well. But you see that elemental mastery, and a lot of times you're like, whoa, he wants to play Wolds. And he does, but he doesn't have to. He plays just his feet giving cover, and that's going to exaggerate good reasons to use our Wolds. The strength buff is another, our non-Wolds is what I meant to say, and so forth. So, yeah, definitely give. And if you haven't played Baldur 1, it's definitely something I recommend giving it a try. I think he's certainly competitive. I think you could build him into, he could be your main list or your secondary list either way. So take a look at good old Baldur. Alright, speaking of looking at good old Baldur, that was Baldur 1, the Stonecleaver. We're going to go to Baldur 2, the Stonesoul. Alright, so some of this is going to sound a little bit familiar, but he is still speed 5, still mat 7. He did go down to defense 13, but up to armor 17. His commands stay the same at 8, and he still has Pathfinder. Tritus is the exact same. He's still Fury 6. He gained 1 hit point, and that cost him 1 War Beast point. He still has Elemental Mastery as well, but he picked up 2 additional rules on the back of his main card. One is Devourer's Debt. During your control phase, place 1 worm token on Baldur. This model gains +1 strength for each worm token on it. At the end of this model's activations, it suffers 1 damage point for each worm token on it. This damage cannot be transferred. And then he has Ritual of Renewal, which is an action which will remove all worm tokens from him. Alright, and then on the back of his card, a spell list. This is completely different, but he has Crevasse, which we talked about with Mosar, but it's a 3-cost, range 8, power 12 offensive spell. If it boxes its original target, you can make a Spray 6 attack using the box model as the model's point of origin. Spray 6 can target models in that model's back arc. The models hit suffer a power 12 magical damage roll. Models boxed by Crevasse are removed from play. Ground 0. Cost 3, range self, AoE 5, power 13, technically not an offensive spell. Center a 5-inch AoE on Baldur. Each other model in the AoE is hit and suffers a power 13 damage roll. Immediately after this damage is resolved, each enemy model damaged by Ground 0 is pushed d6 inches directly away from the spellcaster in the order you choose. He has Rock Wall, a 2-cost control area AoE size wall. Upkeep spell. Place a wall template anywhere completely within the spellcaster's control range where it does not touch a model's base, an obstruction, or an obstacle. The wall is an obstacle that provides cover. And just for clarification, a wall has a defined size in War Machine of 4 inches by 3/4 of an inch. And then finally, Roots of the Earth, kind of his signature ability. 2 costs, range 6, lasts for a round, non-offensive spell. Target friendly faction model gains +3 armor, cannot become knocked down, and cannot move or be placed. And it lasts for 1 round, as I mentioned. Thank you, Jason. And also, his feat is named Hallowed Ground, and this one is simple as it goes. Friendly faction models currently in his control range are affected by Roots of the Earth for 1 round. So that's Baldur. It's Baldur 2. Baldur 2's big thing is that Roots of the Earth spell. The Rockwall's good. Crevasse is interesting. Obviously, like I said, the worm tokens sort of make him actually hit really damn hard if he needs to, if you can afford to take the damage. Like I said, Crevasse is interesting. Ground Zero is let's call it a 2%er. Do not look for reasons to cast that spell. You should remember it's there. You might be able to push some stuff out of a zone or something in a time that it would matter, but definitely don't be looking for reasons to use Ground Zero. It costs half a stack, and even though I know it's an auto hitting POW 13, it's really tempting. It sounds really cool and flashy, but just don't do it. So the spell that you want to really be looking to exploit is Roots of the Earth, and that's his feat and the spell. One thing real quick we should talk about weaknesses is blessed weapons ignore armor buffs, so they will ignore that +3 armor, and that's kind of his whole thing. So even the feat is considered, the way it was ruled is that even if you feat, it's considered to be the spell Roots of the Earth. So the +3 armor from the spell or from the feat utilizing the spell will both be ignored by any weapons that are blessed. Just something to keep in mind. If your opponent is facing off against you with a lot of blessed weapons, you either want to know that you have a way to remove that. You feel okay because they can't get enough of them, or you want to try to dodge that and play your other list. Protectorate is a huge one to watch out for there. Legion as well. But you really want to play with that +3 armor. So that means you kind of can go a couple different ways. Our Wolds obviously already have really high armor. Wold Wrath is armor 20. You can take it to 23, and it has 58 boxes, I think. 56, 58. I think it's 58. So now you have an armor 23 Sacred Warded armor 23 58 box Sacred Warded model, and that thing's a problem. You put it in a zone, it's staying there for a while. It can be killed, but it's staying in that zone for a while. And it regenerates, and you can heal it, etc. Pardon. So that's one approach, right? Take the Wolves. I would say Megalith is essentially an auto include with Baldur. A, he can cast another Roots of the Earth. B, because of the worm token rule, Devourer's Debt, the damage that Baldur takes, you want to use the bond with Megalith to heal. And again, Megalith's already a 10-19 with power 17. Like, he's just good. Being able to bump his armor up to 22 is also good. And yeah, so you definitely, like, I've never seen a list that I thought like was a good list that didn't have Megalith. I think I've seen some double Wold Wrath where people didn't do it. I still think I like the ones. I would prefer one Wold Wrath and Megalith probably. So there's a couple different directions you can go. Don't forget that the Rockwall is certainly relevant, right? It's a little less relevant again with Wold lists, but some of the other lists he can play are with our Warp Wolves. So Loki is a 14-19 on his own. You can make into a 14-22 that cannot be knocked down. So one of the biggest ways a lot of our opponents want to deal with the high defense on our wolves, our Warp Wolves, is by knocking them down. And Roots of the Earth very effectively sidesteps that and says, nope. So now you have to deal with, like I said, let's talk Loki. A 14-19 up to 14-22 can't be knocked down. Oh, and by the way, if you need to, you can put the Rockwall in front of him, and even against melee attacks, he's going to be a 16-22 or an 1822 if you're talking about shooting. Getorix gets to a similar value because of spiny growth. And you can have spiny growth and roots of the earth on the same model. Even even purebloods, they have no way to buff their armor, so they're just a 17, but they still go to 1420, again 1620 possibly. This is another place where many people have played Wrong Eye and Snapjaw, because again, maybe you don't need the wall. Snapjaw and Wrong Eye can be pretty immune to shooting, and then you have your wolves up there, you put Starcrossed in such a way that when they come into you, now you need to hit a defense 14 thing through Starcrossed that's high armor. Like it's just this brick. No matter how you do it, you can kind of construct a brick with Baldur that is just miserable for your opponent to have to deal with, which is good for you. Ferals, which I haven't mentioned, go up to 1418 when they warp armor, so 1421, again, very good. One of my favorite lists, and this is a while back. I've not played Baldur 2 since earlier on in Mark 3, but there was a guy from Germany who played, I think it was I forget his name. I think his name is Robin, but he played Baldur 2, and his loadout was 2 Sentry Stones, but he had Wrong Eye and Snapjaw, 2 Purebloods, a Feral, and Megalith, and I think Lanissa. And that list doesn't quite math out with the points anymore because of the change to Lanissa. But that list, I mean, you could use those Purebloods. You also had the sprays, so now that now you have more. You have you have the sprays from Mannequins, you have the sprays from Purebloods, so you have some work. You still want to see certain types of infantry, maybe, but they could do work against infantry. They could do work at range before if things were trying to just not come in, and they could tank a lot of stuff. Again, like I said, if you can get Wrong Eye in the right position safely, then you've got Starcrossed out there. You've got the defense 14 with the with the Starcrossed, and then the armor, and they can't be knocked down. It's quite a mess, but it's very strong. And that was actually a list I found that was a little more fun. The Wold Wrath variant is very good though. You could still play that. I played one version with Wold Wraths and Wold Guardians for Shield Guards. This was before Grievous Wounds was nerfed, and I felt like I needed a Shield Guard to be able to keep the Wold Wrath from being Grievous Wounded, which it is now immune to. All Gargantuans and Colossus are immune to Grievous Wounds. So that's one approach you could take. I think there's any combination of Warp Wolves. I sort of said them in the order of preference. I would go, I think Getorix, Loki are both pretty critical. Ferals are good. Purebloods probably next, and then lastly the Stalker. You could do a Stalker, but I think for the points and the spray, you're getting a little more out of the Pureblood in this case. And your Baldur's not really the type of caster too often that's going to be able to take advantage of Lightning Strike or anything like that. You could play, so conversely, Baldur 1 I talked a lot about wanting to bring infantry with. Baldur 2 with Roots of the Earth, he does get that feat turned where you get a pretty substantial armor bonus, but other than that, he really can only keep so many smaller individual models with his big buff. So as a result, I feel like you want to have a little bit of a smaller footprint army with him, but you may want to really consider having something that can range out from your brick. Sentry Stones are kind of pretty good at that. You can with him, you're probably not going to use them so much as an LOS block, but you want to use them to be annoying getting mannequins into zones. Something like a Gremlin Swarm or a Feral Geist is also going to be strong. On Crevasse, it's a good spell when RFP's there and when you can sort of target it. be looking for that, but don't you don't want, like, it's a very spendy spell. It's better if Megalith's more accurate with it anyways. It's better if Megalith can Geomancy it, certainly, because it's half of Baldur's stack, plus frequently you're going to feel like you need a boost, and that means a bunch of things don't have an armor buff on them, or Baldur has way too few Fury. So keep that in mind. I didn't mention this. Wold Watchers are very good. They go to armor 21 of their own volition, and then they can go up to armor 24, and for 9 points, that's a trade a lot of people aren't going to want to make. But on the other hand, he's not a shield guard anymore. His output's only okay, so you are playing him mostly just as a roadblock. But Baldur 2 is one of our more consistent answers to the ranged game. So as far as that goes, I would keep him in mind for that. I do think the more blessed guns that start showing up out there, the less we're going to want really to play him, because while the no knockdown is great, but it's not great enough to pay 2 per model for, except in very limited circumstances. So that's something to keep in mind. I do like Baldur 2. I think we'll have to see where that magic weapon situation shakes out. That does not ignore anything that the Rockwall does. Speaking of Rockwall, that's a spell that's really going to be the one that the more you play him, the more you're going to learn where that wall can and cannot be, and how it will and won't help you. Because first of all, as I mentioned, it can give you that +2 to hit if the melee attack's going over it. It also can give you cover, so that's pretty obvious. The other thing it can do is totally block off parts of the table. It's a 4-inch AoE that stuff can't actually sit on, or it's a 4-inch wall AoE that things can't sit on. So if you position it in the correct place, depending on the terrain, depending on the rest of the board, you can keep things off of like a Woldwrath by just putting it 1.5 inches to 2 inches forward. So now you know if they have like a colossal of their own they want to bring in on it, you're like, well, if I put this wall more than 2 inches in front of the Woldwrath, you can't engage it. If you can't engage it, you can't damage it. It's pretty good. You can also put it in ways that you just sort of jam it in. So most colossals are speed 4 or 5. I think the only exceptions being, well, I mean, there's buffs and stuff, but the only native exceptions being the Storm Raptor and the Archangel. And so if you put a 4-inch template in front of it, it's about 5 inches across the base. That means now it can't advance, because it might be able to advance in sort of a weird angle, but it won't be able to advance through your wall, because the wall is, if it's speed 4, the wall is the same size as their movement, which means their 5 inches won't clear the 4 inches. See how that would be a problem. And for something that's speed 5, it can't even charge over the wall without a speed buff, because at speed 8, depending, again, there's going to be angles and stuff. It's never going to be perfect, but at speed 8, you need to clear a 4-inch wall, you need to be able to go at least 9 inches, because otherwise there won't be landing space for the model, because it's a 5-inch. It's basically a 5-inch AoE. So there's stuff like that. Definitely keep in mind. The wall is sort of your tool that you can use creatively, and that's where you're really going to get your kind of clutch. That's going to be the difference between being like really good with Baldur and maybe so-so with Baldur is how good you are with that wall placement. I would not profess to be great with it. I have not played enough games with him. I think knowing when and how to use the Pillars of Salt with Mosar is similar. Although I do know recently Dan Yount wrote a pretty good article on it. Check it out if you get a chance. And he talks about actually mostly not casting Pillars of Salt and doing other stuff. So trying to think of other synergies. Like I said, most of our war beasts. I actually think the new Celestial Fulcrum is probably a pretty solid piece for them. At armor 19, go up to 22, 28 boxes. It's going to be pretty decently tanky. And that gives you something else that can do work in infantry. It doesn't have to be part of your battle group. And it kind of lets him play, if you're going to play Wolds, it'll let him play a few more pieces than he may have otherwise, because Baldur's only got 6 Fury. Usually needs to camp 1 or 2, especially depending on his positioning. So that could be a big help. That could definitely be a big help. I don't know that I would pair it with too many other like Woldwraths, just because of the value. But again, where I was saying it's consolidating the ability to use Roots of the Earth into one place rather than many is good. And then it can deal with infantry, it can deal with heavies a little bit. So that's all pretty good. Trying to think if I've missed any obvious synergies. I'd certainly consider bringing things that heal Wolds with him if you're bringing a Wold list. So the Stone Shapers, Blackclads, maybe if you think. Although I wouldn't really try it necessarily to get the Alpha Strike with Baldur. I think you're better off trying to absorb one and then be tough to kill while you're counterattacking. So I think we're gonna leave it there. That's as far as models. I'm starting to run through the list of them pretty quick, and the 2 Warlocks can be pretty dense as far as what we're talking through. So Baldur 1, Baldur 2, both viable, both very good. I recommend trying out either. I really like both sculpts are pretty alright. Nothing super substantial about them, but they're really good. He's a neat model. He's got a lot of neat character. You can read up on some of his fluff back in the Mark II and Mark I stuff if you are so inclined. Him and Megalith talks about how they're connected. There's some cool stuff there. Cheesy in the way that fantasy stuff written for games often goes, but fun. Yeah, so check out the Baldur 1's been resculpted since Mark 1, so he was one of the original 3 Warlocks, Kaya 1, Kruger 1, and Baldur 1. And he became Epic, the latest of the 3 of them. That wasn't until Mark 2, where the other ones were in Mark 1. Yeah, that's kind of it on Baldur. Just a few more thoughts as I close out. Like I said, next week over Memorial Day weekend. So there'll be one, hopefully, depending on how my week goes next week, there'll be one more episode of Full Circle before I go. If there's not, we'll review when I'm back. But pretty excited to go out there. It's a great con. I definitely recommend checking it out. The hotel block at this point may not have the discount, so you may have missed that. But you can check that out on musonstore.com, I think, and you can search Facebook for their con. I'm pretty excited. I'm going to play some Circle, obviously, in the War Machine events, or at least some War Machine events. I'm hoping to, before I leave, do a video on this at the very least. I do have in my possession some of, I was able to ask the Judgment folks if I could get some models early in order to demo that game, because it looks really fun and the models look really awesome, and they were open to that, and so they sent me some of the models that I had already bought through the Kickstarter early, so that I could do some demos at MusonCon. So I'm pretty excited to get that out there for people to see. I think it's a really cool Kickstarter that a lot of people did notice, but I think there's a lot more people out there that would enjoy it that haven't seen it yet. So I'm pretty excited for that. I don't know how many models Griffin's Roost will get to painting before then, but I'm really excited to see those as they come out. So I'll probably, as I'm starting to do that game a little bit more, I may try to get a second video going, or sporadic videos of that, talking about content from that as well. And certainly I'm still working through kind of assembling those models and stuff, so what I'm hoping to do is video before I go, sort of showing off, talking about that a little bit. So look for that coming up. Next week's Full Circle, I will probably discuss a little bit of what I'm looking to play going into MusonCon, and like I said, if for some reason I'm not able to, we'll talk about it after Muson. I'll talk about what I did play and so forth. Yeah, so I think that's it. I talked a lot about MusonCon, so obviously check out the Muson Minis guys over there. I try to get my videos posted there. It might be behind, though. We'll get that up. Obviously, as I mentioned, Griffin's Roost painting. Bink. Paints all of my models, makes them look pretty gorgeous. No, they are not one piece. Sorry, interrupt there. Anyways, Griffin's Roost painting paints some pretty awesome looking stuff. Check out her page at griffinsroostpainting.com or Griffin's Roost Painting on Facebook. Send over a message if you want to do some inquiries. Pretty much specializes in doing high-end tabletop to showcase quality type pieces. So check that out, and I will look to talk to all of you next week. Thanks for watching.